There's another case of U.S. killing civilians. A U.S. drone strike killed 10 civilians in Afghanistan back in August of 2021. Worse yet, U.S. military officials knew that this drone strike had killed Afghan civilians, including children, but lied about it. In this edition of The Spotlight, we will look at how the U.S. drone campaign has resulted in so many deaths, the recurrence, the faulty intel, and how the U.S. believes lying about it makes them exempt from prosecution. We'll also look at how the decision to go to war in the first place is the reason for so many deaths in the first place. First, let me introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. Judith Bello, peace and justice activist, joins us from Rochester. Also joining us is Fra Hughes, who's a journalist, author, and activist from Belfast. I'd like to welcome you both. Judith Bello, I'll first start with you, taking a look at the incident itself. In case we need a refresher here, it's 10 members of the same family. It included 7 children. You have the youngest victims, who were 2-year-old girls. They were targeted because you had the father carrying water containers that were mistaken for explosives. How do you explain the kind of intel that went into concluding that this happened? I'm sure there were a lot of reasons, but basically the fact that you have the U.S. that's supposed to have state-of-the-art intel accessibility in one form or another, and yet for this incident to have happened.
Well, I feel that there is no explanation that would satisfy me. I believe that the explanations given by the U.S. government are inadequate to this purpose. This is, however, a common occurrence with drones, that they've been tracking this guy. When they, finally launched that drone, they had been tracking the guy for days. So in that amount of time, they should have been able to see that his course was not the course of someone who was a member of Al-Qaeda. And beyond that, they, if they had looked at the listings in our own government, they would have seen that he was an employee of one of our government agencies, a charity that's registered with the government, and they would have been able to see that he was on his normal route. So in my opinion, you can't call what went into this strike intelligence. It was, I think, a kind of hysterical reaction to the events the day before, and to the fact that the entire withdrawal of the U.S. from Afghanistan was done in a disordered and chaotic way, which did not allow the people involved, including the Americans who were working to facilitate this, to be able to calmly and reasonably do their work.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get at over here, and please help me out, Frahi, is because I'm trying to understand how you can be in a position of a military stature of one type of concentration or another that contributes to you making life-taking decisions, and looking at the situation, and maybe I'm wrong in looking at it this way, because it's elementary what I'm asking, is that you take a look at this car and you have these containers that are mistaken for explosives. How do you go from that to that type of mistake, and then to ordering the killing and for that to be targeted, where based on the U.S. announcement, they called it a defensive airstrike, a defensive one, targeting a suspected ISIS-K suicide bomber who posed an imminent threat to the airport. This happened after, of course, the airport was targeted and you had some U.S. soldiers that were killed. But just the logic that goes into that, from the container part to explosive devices, and then for order to be given.
Well, you could see it as a simple case of shoot first and ask questions later. One of the articles that I was reading said that there was a second drone possibly being flown by the CIA. The very fact that the drone is in the air, the very fact that they're following the vehicle, surely with eyes on, they must have been able to see that they were children inside the vehicle. Uh, I think it's possible it was an overreaction. I can't
So
see
they would know
why the
that, you
American
think?
military.
You're saying that they would know that there were children inside the vehicle?
Well, I'm assuming that the very fact that they can see the water canisters, did we all see video of the water canisters being actually fitted onto the vehicle at some stage before it left the family compound? So, you know, if they were following it from the very start, I am assuming, and maybe wrongly, that they saw children get into the vehicle, but had decided that it posed too much of a risk for the American forces at the airbase and decided just to take it out. It proves again the dehumanization of people who are non-Anglo-Saxon white people living in West Asia, Latin America, and on the mainland African continent, that their lives have no value. If there's a threat, a perceived threat against Western imperialist designs within the region and the personnel that carry that out, they're just going to kill people first. I mean, it's not new. We've seen it all before, and it's not just the Americans. If you look at Mossad's targeting of Hamas leaders in Gaza, they think nothing of targeting their military target along with anyone who accompanies that person, which could be a military command structure, could be their family. We have seen drone attacks all over the lakes of Sudan, where they have carried out these extrajudicial assassinations and murdered people to include their families. We've seen attacks on Afghan wedding parties where people were firing kind of small arms in the air to celebrate the weddings. And on more than 3 or 4 occasions, Americans and Afghan soldiers called in airstrikes and murdered those people. So there's nothing new in this. And you know, when you look at what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians not connected to the Japanese military in any sense, wiped out by America with the atom bomb. And you actually had, I mean, you could claim that collateral damage can be used as a governmental policy because Winston Churchill directed Bomber Harris to bomb Dresden between the 13th and the 15th of, I think it was February 1945. And there were 600,000 people in the city, and there were hundreds of thousands of more refugees fleeing from the front line. And they deliberately targeted that town, and the claims between 25,000 and 250,000 civilians were murdered. Winston Churchill wanted German cities bombed to create civilian casualties, to overrun the railway structure and the road structure in Germany in order to prevent the Wehrmacht or whatever carrying on the war. So it's possibly government policy, but it's definitely a government priority to kill people when it suits them without any cause or being held to account.
Yeah, this government policy and the fact that it's nothing new in it, I'd like to put those two together and ask you, Judith Bello, with the concentration or the focus of my question being on the way that the U.S. handles these situations, because it's not something that's actually highlighted that often. When you have, after the strike that happened in August of 2022, you have an Army Major General that comes out and says, we are aware of reports of civilian casualties. This one being the Pentagon spokesman, John Kirby. The U.S. works hard to avoid civilian casualties. We're investigating this. And then coming out to the fact that you have the December 13 announcement coming after they said we're going to investigate it, saying no U.S. troops will be punished for deadly Kabul strike. Pentagon chief decides. Okay? And this is while we are coming to the topic of our program, which shows that the military officials and the higher-ups were aware that civilians had been killed in this incident. What does that show in terms of the way that the U.S. kept it from disclosing it, not being coherent about it, and then, of course, now it's been revealed that they were aware of it?
Yes, well, this is standard procedure. They saw that they had killed all these civilians, and they knew it would cause people to be upset. So they not only denied it, but they created a smokescreen of quasi-denial so that people would not attack them. People would not be angry with them for what they did. And as far as no servicemen being punished for it, I think this is standard American policy. I mean, the United States didn't join the International Criminal Court because if they joined, then Americans would be subject to its jurisdiction. So everywhere the United States has a base, they have a special set of rules where the host country will not prosecute any Americans for any crime. And this has been a horrific problem in Japan over the long years because Americans, being culturally, I think, racist, have committed horrific crimes in Japan, Americans living on the base. And I wouldn't say that about all soldiers or all Americans there, because I know actually some people that are within their own understanding honorable who are soldiers working on these bases or have been. But because there's no consequences. I mean, the consequence for a soldier who commits a crime in Japan against a civilian right now is that they get sent home. Basically, that's it. If they kill somebody, if they rape a woman, whatever, they get sent home. And so when you look at Afghanistan and all this chaos, of course they're not going to accuse any soldiers of any crimes, and they're not going to convict any soldiers of any crimes. And what happened there at that moment was really, an unacceptable breach by the management in the entire procedure of evacuating U.S. soldiers from there. They didn't bring the people who had helped us. As you can see, they didn't care about this guy who had for years been working as an assistant to an American NGO.
Sure.
They were completely, because nobody exists in the world except the Americans. Everyone else is on a different plane.
Yeah, there's a couple problems with a couple issues that you raised there, and the most important one, Frau Hughes, that I'd like to ask you, which, and I appreciate Judith Bello for pointing that out, is the fact that you have the U.S. being the #1 country in the world with the most bases, as far as we know, from 600 to 700 or even more, I'm not too sure. And the fact that you have its forces that come under this, what they want and what they have said is their U.S. legal jurisdiction, which means that they're immune from, for example, courts, and that any investigations of any wrongdoing by the forces will usually end up with them not being prosecuted. That's a problem, isn't it? I mean, I'm not too sure why countries that U.S. has military bases on would agree to that. Why shouldn't this be revised, or why shouldn't there be something that really prevents this immunity? Because then the U.S. soldiers feel like they can, I'm not too sure, go ahead like it's the Wild Wild West.
Yes, I believe there are over 800 American bases throughout the globe. I think you could say that if you create a kind of consensus of immunity, then what you will breed is a form of disregard for human life, a feeling that people are above and beyond the law. We can see it perhaps every day if we just look at what's happening in the occupied territories of the West Bank. You know, the Israelis and the apartheid illegal occupation is murdering Palestinians at will. The Palestinians have the right to defend themselves under any and all circumstances, using any and all means to resist this foreign occupation. So, you know, the foreign occupation of the West Bank, foreign occupation of Iraq, the foreign occupation of Afghanistan and several other countries in the region, it just proves that when you create a sense of immunity, that then people can, you're potentially creating monsters who feel that they can go out and do whatever it is they want with absolutely no recourse to the courts for the victims and absolutely no accountability for the perpetrators. I think one other way potentially to look at this is that if you didn't have that culture, if you had a culture of morality within the armed services, if you had a culture of accountability within the armed services, some of the people who fire these, who kind of use these drones and maybe see civilians in the area might say, well, I'm not going to fire that because I could be subject to war crimes commission. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. The fact that I know there was an incident in Britain recently, it's only 2 or 3 years ago, where someone connected with the American Air Base, I think they were drink driving and run over a young British national, I believe he was either on the road or on a motorcycle. That person fled back to America, and America does not have a reciprocal extradition policy with Britain. So America can't ask for Britain to extradite its citizens for crimes committed in America if those people have returned to Britain, but not vice versa. So, you know, America does believe it's above international law, which is obvious by its actions and by its war crimes, by its war atrocities. And the individuals within that feel that they can do whatever they want because, as everyone agrees, there's no accountability.
Well, you know, when you take a look at the astronomical figure, Judith Bello, that the U.S. Actually spends on, they call it defense. It's really offense, but it's their budget, military budget of, I think it's a record. It reached $1 trillion, maybe a little bit more if you put it all together, and if you add Ukraine in there. So you would think that they have the state-of-the-art, I mean, it's said the U.S. has state-of-the-art military hardware. So you go from the Afghanistan war, and I'm going to fast forward from there to, not fast forward, but to then cross on over to the war in Syria and mention one particular incident where there was, and this was revealed in the Afghan papers, where this incident happened in Syria where the U.S. Special Operations believed that they were targeting Daesh terrorist staging areas in the northern part of the country. They reported that 85 fighters were killed, but then when all the dust settled, more than 120 villagers were killed. I mean, this is just unbelievable. This is part of the history's dustbin at this point. But how is it that they're not learning from their mistakes, from their wars, from all these offensive operations, where you have this, again, I picked this out. This happened in July of 2016. Why are they not learning from it?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Judith Bello, I'm sorry.
Okay. I think they're not learning from it because the brass, the officials, do not consider these mistakes consequential. And because the guys at the low end who commit them want to cover up for themselves. They don't want people to know that they would do such a thing. And you know, Vietnam is the last war that I was alive for, and this has been going on since Vietnam. It's been going on in every war the U.S. fights. Normally, as with Syria and Afghanistan, the U.S. is prosecuting quote-unquote wars. A war should be between two equal opposing parties, not a big guy hammering someone with less resources. And this is true of drones. Again, a drone war is, you know, a way to prosecute a war without being at risk yourself. And so I belong to an organization called Ban Killer Drones, and another local organization that around the local drone base, because these weapons are an invitation to commit atrocities and shrug them off, because the feeds on a drone are not that accurate. The video feeds, especially if the drone is flying pretty high, are very inaccurate, and so the people reading the feed and making decisions based on it do not have a lot of information. It's not like there was a TV show and they showed a drone feed and it was like looking like a TV camera or something. You could see every detail. That's not how it is. And so these guys become accustomed to operating in an environment where they don't clearly see what's going on. And so mistakes, of course, are going to happen. And there are aggressive people who might do it on purpose, but I think in many cases it really is just that there's not a lot, they know they're not going to be held responsible, and their information isn't really clear. And there are so many drone pilots in this country right now suffering from PTSD from these wars because the decisions to prosecute them are wrong. They are decisions to send a military force against a civilian population that does not have an equal military force to defend itself. So these are decisions made by the powerful to attack areas where, of course, you're going to have more civilian casualties because the military force there is part of the civil society.
That, you know, what you just said is maybe the root of the problem, Frau Hughes, isn't it? That the military becoming part of civil society, the option that the U.S. has, diplomacy is at the bottom in terms of a choice. Yet the military and war seems to be the choice that the U.S. makes. Isn't that where the root of this problem is? Where, well, I mean, we could dream about it to have a world without wars. Why does the U.S. pursue the war path instead of the diplomatic path?
So
Judith Bello, this is for Frau Hughes. I'm sorry, Judith Bello. Go ahead, Frau Hughes.
Thank you. Yes, I was just going to say it's maybe a case of might is right. America has the military and financial resources to be able to destroy a country like Iraq, to destroy a country like Afghanistan. It can destroy Syria if it so chooses. I think money is the root of all evil, and I think money is the root problem about taking the natural resources that belong to other people and other nations, other sovereign countries. I believe that during the American Civil War, Lincoln said he feared the bankers behind him more than he feared the Confederates in front of him. So war is about money. War is about profit. The modern day imperialist on the block is the United States of America. But we're just carrying on from the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century wars, where we previously had colonization and occupation, military occupation, throughout the world by people like Britain, who at one stage occupied every country in the world bar 22, I think, in the early part of the 20th century. So it's about money, it's about profit, it's about the elite at the very top. I don't think the American people ever wanted the war in Iran. I don't think they wanted the war in Afghanistan. I think it is the corrupt political elite in the industrial military complex that are making profit, and they have the wherewithal to procure the weapons of war to make sure that they can win these battles against basically what are minnow countries with very little self-defense capabilities.
Thank you very much for that. We're unfortunately out of time. Let me thank Frau Hughes, journalist, author, and activist, and Judith Bello. Judith Bello, that website that you said, Ban Killer Drones, that's what the name is? .org, is that accurate?
Yes, it's bankillerdrones.org.
Okay, very good. Judith Bello, peace and justice activist, and of course the website bankillerdrones.org. You do want to check it out. Spoke to us from Rochester, New York. Thank you to you both. With that, we come to an end for this edition of The Spotlight from Mikhail Tarvey and the team. It's goodbye.